Most people dream of buying a property cash. And while I understand this rationale, I actually want to challenge that thought today and maybe help you understand why I say you shouldn't be buying properties cash. Or if you are buying properties cash, you should still apply for a mortgage loan at the same time. I'm going to be looking at the scenario for both owner occupiers as well as investors and explaining why using finance strategically might be more powerful than going debt free. In the case of the owner occupier, cash flow protection is very important. Even if you have the cash and you're just trying to purchase your property, cash to get away from that risk, remember that you are tying up cash flow. And the only way to get out of that, to get that cash back out of your investment, if it's tied up in the brick and mortar, is either to refinance your home. And if you do that, it's probably going to take about 90 days to get that bond registered and paid out, or to sell the home. How long is it going to take to sell the home? And if you do sell it, you're subject to a transfer period. And remember, even if you say, but Rowan, it's fine. If I refinance that house and I have that money available within 90 days, I'll be okay. What happens if the term preceding you refinancing doesn't actually allow for you to apply for financing? What happens if you've lost your job or you become ill, you become incapacitated, and for some reason you cannot apply for a mortgage loan retrospectively? If you've lost that opportunity to apply, your scenario could go from bad to worse quite quickly. So that's why I'm saying cash flow protection is probably the main motivator for owner-occupier to have access to that fund again. The way that you do that is by registering an access facility. So you buy the property, register 100% bond, and you repay that bond immediately. So I'm not saying that you should, go into a process of repaying that installment monthly until the bond is repaid. You can actually apply for a loan, register it once, upon registration, settle it once, and then you would have effectively have prepaid your loan. That gives you the ability to withdraw that money again, all the portions that you have prepaid. So remember, in month one, you would have repaid or prepaid the full 240 month period, so you'd have access to the full available loan, whereas after 10 years you might only have prepaid 40% of the loan. So whatever you have prepaid is the money that becomes available. So over time that available balance will deplete, but the important thing is that you will still have access to all or a large part of the money that you have invested in that brick and mortar. Why is this important? It's important because life happens. You need liquidity for life events, whether that be business opportunities that you're looking to capitalize on, medical bills, unexpected costs that you're going to have in your life. You might want to use these funds at a later point in time to put your children through university, or contribute towards the startup of their life, whether that be through weddings, or whether they're getting married, a startup property, buying them a vehicle. You might need cash at a certain point in time, and at that point in time you might not have it, and a home loan would potentially be the cheapest way to get that, in terms of the interest rate that you would have, as well as the repayment term that you would have to repay that loan. And remember, you'll stay in control of that based upon how much you repay. But having cash flow available is, as I've said, that's going to be the big one, because you may even find yourself in periods where your income becomes lumpy because you've started a new business at some point in time in your life, or you decide to change jobs or career, and you go through periods of lower income, where you might need money to supplement the decision. If you start your own business 10 years into the property ownership cycle, you may want that buffer of cash flow to actually help you start up that business. And, once you're generating the income, you can repay that loan again. But having access to that funds that you've put into the brick and mortar is of sort of utmost importance. The next important factor besides cash flow is the psychology of having a mortgage bond accessible. That's huge. The psychology behind being house rich but cash poor can be so stressful that if you are able to turn that around and you have liquidity, it gives you absolute peace of mind. It becomes your sleeping pill, where knowing that you have access to that money. The psychology around that, makes you far more resilient to be able to face financial stresses, and it actually just reduces that financial stress, knowing that you potentially have that money should you need it. If you opt not to repay that mortgage immediately, but you go over to in paying that in installments monthly, because you may be using that capital to invest into something else, whether it be stock markets or a business venture. Remember that over time, your repayments become cheaper in real terms as your income rises and the inflation erodes the value of money. When you start off, your 10,000 Rand mortgage installment might be as much as 50% of your salary. But over time, as your income increases and your installment remains fixed, if your salary increases from 20,000 Rand to 50,000 Rand, in 10 years' time, that installment will only be worth about 20% of your income rather than 50%. So it is also an inflationary hedge if you do opt to do that and use that money for something else. So to summarize, the value of cash flow, the value of having access to that cash, and the psychology behind that, and having that security and peace of mind that you have access to those funds, those things to me are what you need to weigh up against the cost of registering that bond. And in my experience, in my life, the way that I've used that, it's been absolutely priceless. The second case is that of the investor. And the investor, same story again. Even if you have the cash available, going to teach you why you should not be using that cash for your purchase, but rather register a bond. The first one, the big one that every investor should know about, is the tax deductibility of the interest on the loan. So if you have interest on the property loan, it is deductible from your taxable income, thereby meaning that you have a benefit of paying less income tax. It's something that's provided for in our tax system. By doing that, you sort of also stretch the tax clock. What I mean by that is, with higher and longer interest rate periods, you stay in a tax loss or a lower tax position for a longer period of time, thereby compounding these benefits. If you in a position where your interest paid sort of extends your tax obligation, and in the meantime you can trade with that money elsewhere, you could potentially earn more money. This is especially true in the instance where you are a individual owner, so meaning that you own the property in your personal capacity. Any tax loss that you have or any tax loss that you have in the investment property would give you a direct benefit in your personal income tax. If you have a 50,000 Rand loss on your investment property, that will reduce your taxable earnings in your personal capacity by 50,000 Rand. In the same way, in entities, the entity will have that same benefit. But if the entity is solely for the ownership of property, it could start accumulating a loss, which carries over into subsequent years, and again affects that tax clock that we're talking about, that extended period of benefit. So you may say to me, Rowan, but looking at that in isolation, it's sort of silly to be spending 1 Rand to save 30 cents. And I agree, because the next point from an investor's perspective is scalability. And that's exactly what access to finance allows you to do. Rather than buying one property for 3 million Rand cash, you can in fact split the 3 million Rand and buy 2 properties worth 3 million Rand each, and use your 3 million as the deposit for those properties, effectively owning a portfolio of 6 million Rand, having put in your 3 million Rand cash and financed the second 3 million Rand. That can then be repaid by a tenant, allowing you to scale your investment value. Would you want to own one property of 3 million Rand cash, or would you like to buy 2 properties, each with a 50% bond? Let me know in the comments, and let's have those discussions going as to what you would be doing. The other thing that I like is that it gives you control and flexibility. So if you've bought this property cash, or if you're going to buy it cash, but you've bonded it and you have the cash, at any point in time, you can settle that loan. So if you're seeing that this whole idea about scalability, or this idea regarding the tax benefits of the interest that can be deducted don't suit your needs, or you want to adjust your strategy, you can simply repay that loan immediately, and you'll be in the position that you would have been if you had bought that property cash up front. So the risk involved in that, by tying up all your money in the brick and mortar, as opposed to having that flexibility where you are in control. Again, you can't unspend money that's locked up in brick and mortar. It's going to take you time. It's going to take you effort. And very often when you need that, you're not going to be in a position to actually go and unlock it. So what you can see is that this creates the opportunity or the circumstance where you're in control and you're not simply handing over money and having to go and fight for it later if you need it, being either by selling that property or refinancing it at a later point in time. In business and in investment space, this very often allows for some form of diversification where rather than locking all of your capital into one property, you can use this money again, to invest in other properties or in stocks or in businesses or in other ventures. I recently went through the process where I bought a property and I went through the rezoning to add value. We'll catch up on that at some point in time. But I basically went through a redevelopment process. But by buying that property and then using the loan to actually fund the redevelopment, I was able to create value, so it becomes part of your cash flow for trading too. Rather than having paid off that property, I couldn't then go and borrow the money that I would have needed to go through that rezoning process. That's a typical example. So some of the common objections I get when I propose this is to say, Rowan, but I hate debt and I just don't like debt. But I need to clarify this. It's not consumer debt. It's structured income producing leverage. So remember that. And you've got to not only think about now, but you've got to think about the future. If you should need that income, how are you going to go about that? So yes, you can remember, you settle it right away. You don't have that debt, but you have access to it. So you may hate debt, but if you need access to cash, you don't want to be in that position. The next objection is, but Rowan, what if interest rates go up? And this is true. Rates fluctuate, but so do rental escalations if you have a property portfolio. And, this is very often offset by inflation over time. But at the same time, don't forget that you've still got that cash available to simply settle the loan if you have opted to buy the property cash and you haven't gone the route of scaling. If you're an owner-occupier or an investor that's sitting on that cash, but you've just given yourself a nest egg in case you need it, then you've always got that option to simply just dump it in and settle the bond. But again, as an investor, if interest rates do fluctuate and you go through cycles, remember that rental cycles do the same. Currently, interest rates are on a downward cycle, but rentals on the upward cycle. So periods like this, you'll just need to make extra provision so that when interest rates do cycle upwards and rental escalations on the downward, that you have made enough provisions out of that rental income to carry yourself again in future. Another objection that I often get, or sentiment that I get, is where people say, but Rowan, cash just simply feels safer. And remember, this is exactly it. It feels safer. Safety is relative, and being stuck with no liquidity is very often riskier than controlled leverage, where you're in control. The last objection I get is, but I simply want to own my home outright. And like with the feeling safer, this is just emotional security. It's not financial optimization. If that's your goal, that's okay. But financially, it's not the best play to play. So if you're going to be following my advice, I want to give you 4 quick tips for using bonds smartly. First is always to take an access bond. I talk about this often. Access bond allows you to access the money that you have prepaid, whether you've prepaid that money monthly or whether you've prepaid that money in a lump sum. Any payment that you've made over and above your contractual obligation can be taken out again out of an access loan. So be sure to always take access bonds. This gives you flexibility. It gives you control. If you have a bond, overpay lump sums whenever you can. That ensures that you will build up access. And if you don't make use of that access, it will shorten your term dramatically. Third, don't over leverage. Use debt wisely. Don't use it as a lifestyle supplement. Use it as a strategic decision for a reserve fund when you need it. Or if you're going to be using it to scale your business, use it as strategic leverage. And then last thing, think portfolio, not property. So look at spreading your risk, look at spreading your growth, look at spreading your investment into different properties and scaling this investment decision. Again, property is the only asset class that allows you to do this. So to recap and to end this off, remember that for both homeowners and investors, a mortgage can be a powerful tool when used correctly. Cash should be able to work for you, not simply sit in brick and mortar. So next time someone tells you that they want to buy the property cash, send them this episode, because financial freedom isn't simply about owning debt-free property. It's about controlling your cash flows and using leverage smartly. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please like and subscribe. If you haven't done that yet, hit the bell for notifications and share this to someone who you think will find this episode valuable. Okay, so if you're an investor and you're still around and you've enjoyed that episode, but you want to see a visual representation of what I'm saying, I've actually put together a little two-case scenario with two cases where, number one, you buy the property cash, and number two, you buy two properties that are 50% bonded each. Going to put them on the screen for you now to have a look, and just to show the power of this gearing and what we've been explaining. So in option A, you purchase the property for 3 million Rand. The capital growth after 10 years at a 7.5% sits at 6.2 million Rand. You have zero outstanding debt, and your net wealth is 6.2 million Rand, capital only. In option B, you've bought two properties of 3 million Rand each. Total portfolio is worth 6 million, of which 50% is bonded. After 10 years, the value is 12.4 million because it's two properties, but your outstanding bond is 2 million Rand combined, about 2.2 million Rand, leaving you with net capital wealth of 10.2 as opposed to 6.2. So you see, through that process, you've generated additional 4 million Rand in net wealth. And very often people will say, hey, but Rowan, I could have used my rental income in scenario A to, sort of buy the next property. And we've covered that before in one of our other episodes, that the capital appreciating properties will always beat the rental income in terms of scaling your portfolio. So look at option B. That's the one that you should be looking at.